All right. We are going to get started. We have a lot of technology happening here, and we've never done a program where we have a speaker on Zoom and people on Zoom and people in here. So bear with us if things go weird, but most of you know me that are here. My name is Jennifer. I'm the director here at the museum, and I'm going to turn it over to Holly to introduce Rachel. But before that, this is our special exhibit for those of you that are here. It's historic photos of Roscoe Village. It's supposed to come down at the end of December, but we decided to keep it up through January. So if you haven't had a chance to come and look at the exhibit, you got an extra month. So it'll come down at the end of January, beginning of February. So I'm going to turn it over to Holly.
Okay, good evening. Hi, Rachel. I have the honor of introducing Rachel this evening. Rachel Yoder, although most of you here know her, but I'm going to do the official introduction anyway. Rachel Yoder is the author of Nightbitch, which was published in 2021. It was her debut novel. A film adaptation was written and directed by Marielle Heller and starring Amy Adams, and it was released earlier this month. And I got to see it last week, I think, and it was awesome. And someone in the audience just said that our local movie theater is going to run it in January for 2 weeks, so we can all go see it. I actually wanted to sit and, you know, like when you were a kid, and sit through 2 sessions and hope they didn't kick me out. The novel was selected as an Indie Next Pick in August 2021. It was named a Best Book of the Year by Esquire and Vulture, recognized as a finalist for the Penn Hemingway Award for Debut Fiction. It was a finalist for the VCU Cabell First Novelist Award and shortlisted for the McKitterick Prize. Rachel's stories and essays have appeared in publications such as Harper's, the New York Times, the Paris Review, the Southern Review, and the Sun. She is the co-founding editor of Draft, the Journal of Process. Formerly the 23-24 Trias Writer-in-Residence at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, she now serves as Assistant Professor of Screenwriting and Cinema Arts at the University of Iowa. And she lives in Iowa City with her husband and son. And she grew up in Coshocton County. And she worked at the museum when she was a teenager. So I was going to ask you, Rachel, when you worked here at the museum, did you have a favorite artifact or a favorite section, a favorite room in the museum?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is somewhat surreal to be talking to you, and you're at the Johnson-Humrickhouse Museum, and I feel connected in time to the teenager who isn't shared that same space, and just thinking about the distance traveled, and just really wonderful to be in conversation with you and have people from my hometown there. So thank you so much. You know, I was racking my brain today and sort of panicked because I couldn't remember anything, not a lot about the museum. I think it was my very first job. But I do remember that one of my favorite tasks was when I got to index artifacts in the basement. I felt very grown up, and it seemed very cool to me. So I loved that, and I loved working in the gift shop too and taking people's money. I thought that was very fun.
Okay. Well, and likewise, we are very thankful to you for doing this with us. Jen and I had a conversation one day at the museum and said, you know, this movie's coming out. We I attended the reading and the great interview that Patty Malinky did with you at the Woolly Pig. And so this just seemed like an opportunity to do it again, only because now we have the movie to celebrate. And to put the spin of the artifacts and the museum collection together with your novel. So I guess we're ready to plunge in, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We have so much that we can talk about. And I was telling Jen the other day, I wish we could do this, like take a whole day or a weekend even. And do like a retreat where we have a little bit of input, and then we go take a walk in the woods, and then we write in our journals and we discuss things and have good food, and but we're not doing that. So my point being that there's so much that we could talk about, and we can't really do it justice. And so Jen and I decided that at an hour, we're just going to stop and then have questions and answers after that. So are you keeping time?
An hour starting now.
Okay, an hour starting now. Okay.
Share my screen real fast.
So as a way of introducing the theme for this evening,
That's not what I wanted to do.
technology.
I'm also wondering if everyone can make sure that they're on mute, just because there's a lot of background noise. So if you don't see the little microphone with the X through it in your bottom corner, just go down to the bottom and click on audio and exit out. Thanks.
Thank you.
Everyone should be muted. Okay.
Okay.
We can't be muted though. No, we gotta stay.
You gotta hear us. Okay.
Yeah.
So as a way of introducing the theme for this evening, we're going to open with a short passage from Nightbitch. And in the story, the mother, when she suspects that she is turning into a dog, did what any reasonable person would do and went to the library. And she found under Dewey Decimal Number 398.3/WHI, because Rachel is the daughter of a librarian, so she knows these things. And the book is called A Field Guide to Magical Women by Wanda White. So that night she goes home, and after she puts her little boy to bed, she begins to delve into the book. And Rachel's going to read this for us.
In the foreword, Wanda White explained she was, quote, interested in the ways in which womanhood manifests on a mythical level, and was particularly drawn to, quote, the experience of motherhood and how this complicates, deepens, or denies womanhood. Then went on to ask, to what identities do women turn when those available to them fail? How do women expand their identities to encompass all parts of their beings? How might women turn to the natural world to express their deepest longings and most primal fantasies?
We're going to deal with tonight. Do these artifacts from other times and other cultures give us any clues about how women in the 21st century can expand their identities to encompass all parts of their beings? Wanda White is one of my favorite characters in the novel. She and her book, I wanted them to be real. And I even, I knew that they weren't real, but I couldn't help myself from Googling the name Wanda White and the title, just in case Rachel was like talking about a real book. But it is a fictional book. But I have this book called Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And it comes close to the Field Guide to Magical Women. Estes helps women expand their identities by reclaiming the archetype of the wild woman. And this is what she says. The wild woman has been shadowing human women for years. Now we see a glimpse of her. Now she is invisible again. Yet she makes so many appearances in our lives and in so many different forms, we feel surrounded by her images and urges. She comes to us in dreams or in stories, for she wants to see who we are and if we are ready to join her yet. If we but look at the shadows we cast, we see that they are not two-legged human shadows, but the lovely shape of something free and wild. So I was just wondering, Rachel, if you have ever read that book, Women Who Run with the Wolves.
I haven't, but it's been one I've been hearing about probably for 25 years, ever since I went to Prescott College in Arizona and was sort of introduced to the archetype of the wild woman and the woman in nature. And now I'm sort of scared to read it. But I do own it.
Okay, you do own a copy of it?
I
Okay.
do, but I don't think I got it until after my book was written and someone, I think my editor brought it up. And so then I got a copy and didn't read it and put it on a bookshelf.
Well, it'll be there for you when you need it. That's
Right.
okay. So my copy was my mom's, and a friend of hers gave it to her. It was published in 1992, and I think my mom got her copy, and she told me I should read it, but I was busy raising two little boys, and I didn't have time to read a book this thick at that point in my life. But anyway, when I was reading Nightbitch, I kept thinking about Women Who Run with the Wolves. And because I feel like that archetype of the wild woman definitely is in the pages of your work. And it just says to me how the collective unconscious is a real thing, because it can rise up in so many different places. Estes says that storytelling involves bringing up or hauling up. And if you've read Nightbitch, you know that Rachel has hauled up a lot of stuff. I saw a little interview with Marielle Heller, and she talked about how they came to decide on the transformation of Amy Adams. They had her digging in the backyard, and as she's digging, she turns into a dog. And they wanted to make it an appealing, like usually when you see werewolves, it's a painful, horrible process. It goes against nature. But in the movie, it's more of a natural transformation. And so we're going to go a little bit below the surface tonight and dig a little deeper. And maybe we're going to use our brains in a slightly different way. But as Nightbitch herself says, if you want to read that part, Rachel.
Sorry, I'm busy taking notes. It was clear that her answers were not going to reside in the land of logic, the land of doctors and prescriptions, the land of peer-reviewed journals, the land of the goddamn sun rising in the east and setting in the west. Yes, answers to her questions resided in the land of the backward sun, the land of counterclockwise rotation, in the land populated only by artists and fortune tellers and people on stilts. And wasn't Wanda White, mythical ethnographer, indeed a native to such land? Whether scientist or something else, she was on a similar journey.
And as Clarissa Pinkola Estes would say, this kind of storytelling is a healing art. This is more than just a novel. Its story is medicine. So what we're going to do tonight, we've divided the evening into 5 different parts. I've been sort of thinking of them as acts. And so for each part, each section, we're going to hear a selection from Nightbitch, and then we're going to I have a question for Rachel. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and then Jen's going to share some artifacts. So the first act, the first scene is the dog. And so Rachel is going to read us a selection. Just read both of those that we have there, Rachel,
Okay.
about we're considering dogness. Take it away.
Great. And in this scene, starts out by talking to her husband. And look at my teeth, she said, baring her teeth and pointing to her canines. She was convinced they had grown and the tips had narrowed to ferocious points that could cut a finger with a mere prick. Why, she had nearly cut hers during her nightly examination in the bathroom. Every night when her husband was gone and their son was happily playing with trains in his pajamas, she stood at the mirror and pulled her lips back from her teeth, turned her head from side to side, then tilted her head back and looked at her teeth from that bottom up angle, searched the internet on her phone for pictures of canines to which she might compare her own, tapped her teeth with her fingernails, told herself she was being silly, then searched humans with dog teeth on her phone, searched do humans and dogs share a common ancestor, searched human animal hybrid and recessive animal genes in humans, and research human animal genes legacy, searched werewolves, searched real werewolves in history, searched somewhat inexplicably witches, searched somewhat relatedly hysteria 19th century, and then, since she wanted to, searched rest cures and the yellow wallpaper, and she reread the yellow wallpaper, which she had once read in college, then stared blankly for a while at nothing in particular while sitting on the toilet, then stopped searching altogether. She wasn't turning into a dog. She did not have a tail. Her teeth had not sharpened. And the hair that now covered the entire back of her neck was not fur. Her husband was right, and she truly needed to hold fast to reason in times like these. Ugh, she simply could not let herself imagine such fanciful things and didn't, except at night, once the boy was asleep, when she sat, panting at the window, staring into the open, dark night.
That's such a beautiful scene there. And the way that you search, you have her search a couple of times in the novel like that, which I found just absolutely hilarious because I've done the same thing. It's usually about medical conditions.
Hmm.
Know that you shouldn't do that, but you can't help it. Um, but also part of what you do there that I think is really clever, you bring in things like hysteria, 19th century, and the yellow wallpaper, and those things that you don't spend time in the novel talking about those, but that is definitely underpinning, what there's a long history of women feeling like there's something wrong and nobody believing them and telling them that's all in their heads.
Yeah.
So that well done. I love that. I love both of those sections. So the question for you, Rachel, there was a little article in Vanity Fair that I read when the movie was coming out. And they say in the article, the twist in Nightbitch is that going canine makes mother a better mother. She's less stressed, more instinctual. Finding her footing as a parent also allows her to make art again. As Amy Adams, the actress who portrays the mother in the film, puts it, through her parenting, through her mothering, she got in touch with something bigger and something primal. And so our question for you, Rachel, is we want to talk about this idea of going canine and where you came up with the idea to write a novel about a woman who turns into a dog.
Well, I think all of this came from my body and the experience of immediately and inextricably being in my body when I gave birth to my son. Um, there's no way to kind of zone out while you're in labor. There's no way to leave your body. You can't exit it. And I think as women, we learn how to exit our bodies at a very young age. That's sort of our lessons as girls and women is how to disconnect ourselves from our instincts, from our fear, from our desire. And it seemed like labor and motherhood was a doorway into this reconnection with how my body felt and what my body was telling me. Um, and it wasn't a conscious thing whatsoever. I mean, I think this book was a process of sort of coming to that conclusion. Um, but I knew before I wrote this book, I was listening. Again, I couldn't really not listen to the sort of fury and anger of my body. And I didn't know what to do with it, especially as a woman. You know, we're not supposed to be angry. We're not supposed to make a scene. And if you do, there's something wrong with you and you're hysterical. So I thought, how can I be the most hysterical I've ever been? Um, but have people not turn away, have them listen to me. And I think that's, again, not consciously, but that's sort of what underpinned this idea of a mom turning into a dog. And I didn't give it much thought when I rolled into writing the book. It just felt correct. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know why a dog. I just thought there's a correctness to this that I'm just going to go with, and I'm not going to think about it too much.
Well, and obviously it worked. And it's given me a lot to think about. And so what we have done is we have searched the museum collection for evidence of dogs and dogness. And Jen is going to share some of that with us now.
All right. Well, first off, I want to talk a little bit about my experience reading the book. I read it when it first came out, like 22-ish, I think. And I remember loving it. And then I just recently reread it to refresh for this. And I just loved it even more because I was a little further away from having little kids. But there's
Mhm.
so many of those moments that I can totally relate to, like laying in bed with this child wallowing all over you. And it's just like, I just want to sleep. I just need sleep. Or the moments where you hate everything. You hate your kid. You hate the cat. You hate your husband. It's just a moment where you're like, I can't do this right now. And so it's
Mhm.
like rereading it, I really was able to pick out those moments where it's like, oh my gosh, I remember that so well. So I really just, and I'm an artist, so I'm in this moment where I'm trying to do my job here at the museum and raise two kids and try to fit in art
Mhm.
along the way too. So I relate a lot to the book. So I just love it. I'll probably read it again in a few more years. But our first artifact that we're going to talk about is this Wasco Sally bag. Let me move this out of the way so everyone can see it. There we go. Oh, did I go too far? I did. Okay, so it's a Sally bag. Tribes all over carried some sort of Sally bag, and this is mostly a bag that was carried by women. This one is small and more round. We have some downstairs in our Native American collection that are flat. When I'm talking to fourth graders or maybe third graders about this, I say that it's like a reusable grocery bag. They are able to take it out into the woods, collect their seeds and their nuts and their probably not their mushrooms because it gets smashed, but things like that, stuff that can be packed into this bag, and it would be slung over their shoulder and then taken back to the village with them. And so one reason we chose a Sally bag is because the mother talks a lot about the bag, pulling stuff out of the bag, putting stuff in the bag. And as women, as mothers, we always have a bag with us, and it's full of the craziest things. When your kids are really, really little, there's rocks in your bag, or maybe there's still rocks in your bag and you have young teenagers, which I do. So a bag is really important to women to carry all of our crap and everyone else's stuff too. And what's cool about this Sally bag, oh, I didn't tell you where it was from. It's from Columbia River area in Oregon. And that's important because of what's on the bag. So you will see this figure here, which I'll talk about in a minute. But then this right here, these are the dogs on the bag. And dogs were important to the indigenous people. They were spiritual beings, guides, symbols of loyalty and protection, which nowadays we still see dogs that way. But this figure right here, this we believe is She Who Watches. And these are petroglyphs that can be found along the Columbian River in Oregon. And the legend is, it tells of the legend tells of a female chief who was concerned over what would happen to her people when she was gone. Coyote came to her and told her that soon the world would change and that women would no longer be chiefs. Coyote then tricked her and turned her into a rock, saying, "Now you shall stay here forever and watch over your people and the river." So here's this, and then I'll go back, and then there is the figure. So that's a pretty close resemblance. And you have to think of how this basket was made. You know, it's woven. So the strands or the material used to weave, the color is not painted on there, it's woven in. So it's just like knitting or crocheting. When you want to create an image, you have to knit that in with a different color. So it's pretty exact to being, she who watches on this basket, which is pretty cool. Did you get everything?
Yeah.
All right.
And just to say that we found the Sally bag because of the dogs. We put dog in our search in this for the access, and we found the Sally bag, and then we were looking for, because I was wondering, I don't know why they call them Sally bags, and I still don't know that, but we discovered through searching for the Sally part of the bag, another museum who had made that connection with She Who Watches. And we hadn't really paid attention to the human. It's like, oh, it's a human, and there are dogs. But then when we saw their museum piece, their Sally bag, and when we looked at this picture that you see up on the screen, it's like, oh my gosh, that's her on our bag. And she's been sitting here watching. And it's the story kind of makes it sound like Coyote might have tricked her and turned her into a rock, but it was because she was such a good leader of her people and she hated to leave them that she was transformed really into a rock so that she could watch over them. Yes, ma'am.
Are they coyotes on there? Not
According to Access, they're dogs.
It's from I think it's 19th century. So it's a later basket. So it could be a coyote. It could be a dog.
Coyote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be.
Dogs. It's a canine of some sort. Okay, so if we were doing this as a retreat, and even though we're not, I have a question for all of us to consider, and this is not something to answer out loud. This is just, for our own personal thinking. And that question is, do you have a female ancestral leader who you feel is watching over you? And that could be someone like a relative. It could be a public figure, just something to think about. And also realizing the indigenous people, when they talked about these ancestral figures, like She Who Watches, they relate to her as an actual person a relative in their family tree. So as we think about our ancestral leaders, thinking of them watching over us and just how that makes us feel. Clarissa Pinkola Estes would say that she who watches, and probably whatever ancestral person you're thinking of, that she would put those in the category of another archetype. We've talked about the wild woman archetype. There's another archetype called the dangerous old woman. And so she who watches is a dangerous old woman. And that is based on an archaic definition of danger, which means protection. Shakespeare used that. He used the word danger in one of his plays like that. And so the dangerous old woman invites us to stand in her danger, to stand in her protection. So we are protected. Okay, now we're going to go on to the next section, which is we're going to focus on the transformation that happens. And we can think of it as what is wrong with that mother, or we can think of it, is there in fact anything wrong or abnormal about turning into a dog? And Rachel is going to read, again, 2 different selections from her book.
Thank you for that question, too. Is there anything wrong or abnormal about turning into a dog? I feel like we're on the same wavelength, and I appreciate that. On Monday morning, she did what any totally and completely normal person would do who had recently transformed into a dog, and sat on the toilet with the lid down, searching the internet as she listened to her husband and son move about the house. She started with werewolf facts and real monsters, then moved on to shape-shifting and shape-shifting Native American, then skinwalkers and Navajo witches. She read and read, but what she wanted to find was a mother who turned into a dog, a regular domesticated dog capable of being a pet. And so she kept on with mother myth and madre perro, thinking somehow the Spanish would produce more desired results. Hormonal extremes, hair, and postnatal hair abundance, humans killing animals with their mouths. And then, because it occurred to her, cannibals and headhunters. And it was at this point she knew she had wandered too far astray and stopped altogether. And then the next passage, she's talking to another mommy named Jen. What inspires you? Jen prodded. The book mommy's already on to talking about kindergarten roundup. Oh, Nightbitch said, I guess you could say it's sort of an art project I'm developing. Ooh, Jen said, eyes widening. You're an artist? Used to be, Nightbitch said. What's the project? Jen asked, only to be set upon by her twins, screaming over a piggy puppet they both wanted, but neither could peacefully have. Nightbitch dug through her bag, looking for nothing, just to have a task with which to be occupied. For how could she say what her project was? Something to do with dogs, magic, or not magic exactly, but power? Feminine power, finally wielded. For wasn't that what all those witches in colonial America had been burned for? All the folk medicine practitioners, the midwives. Too much power makes a woman dangerous. And that was her project, creation and power.
Okay, so too much power makes a woman dangerous, as in standing in my danger, standing in my protection. And sometimes people who have a good place in the status quo don't like it when women gain that kind of power. So we chose these 2 passages because they both mention witchcraft. And thinking about this idea of a person transforming into an animal, there's a new book that came out this year called The Tame and the Wild, People and Animals After 1492 was written by Marcy Norton. And in the book, she describes two different attitudes toward people who turn into animals. The first group is the indigenous people who inhabited the land that Christopher Columbus bumped into. They saw animals, vegetables, and minerals as having personhood. They weren't seen as commodities. They were seen as something to relate to. They were seen as relations. Norton uses the term porosity to describe this worldview, meaning that the boundaries between humans and the created world were much more fluid and permeable, more porous than the way modern Westerners, the way we perceive ourselves. So basically, they didn't see themselves as separate from nature, so it wasn't such a big leap for them to take on the attributes of animals. So they did this in their ceremonies and in their hunting practices. In contrast to that worldview, Norton discusses the Europeans who saw the transformation from person to animal as a sign of witchcraft. And this is a quote from her book. She says, "For one thing, the devil usually assumed the form of a black animal, such as a bear or ram, but most often as a he-goat, sometimes as a dog or monkey, never in human form. One author, a Jesuit named Martin del Rio, wrote in the late 16th century that the devil, quote, wraps actual people very tightly in genuine animal skins, and in this case, he gives them a wolf pelt, which they are supposed to keep hidden in the hollow of a tree." So Nightbitch would have been in trouble in that society. So our question for you for this section, Rachel, is, for me personally, when I was reading the book, I felt like you were really holding these two attitudes in sort of a narrative tension. This idea that there's something wrong with this woman, and the idea of porosity and relationship, and that turning into a dog is ultimately a good thing. As a reader, there were points when I was kind of creeped out and startled by Mother's transformation. And then there were times when I was like, "You go, girl." And so it really did. There were times that I felt really tense and really like, oh, I don't know if I know this. I'm just going to stick with it and see what happens. So is this what you were going for? Were you trying to make us feel uncomfortable on purpose?
I mean, probably. I think I think what was interesting, and again, I didn't really know what I was doing when I was writing it, but now having talked about it so much, I think there's something to be said about, especially for a mother in this book, the time after becoming a mother where darkness is present, right? And an animal is present. And instead of exiling the animal, she comes in, she relates with it. Um, and I think there is this discomfort in our society with anything in motherhood that isn't, you know, cherubs and cuteness and clean laundry on the line. Um, and I think the beast of motherhood is postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis and mothers who are really overwhelmed. And that's sort of the darkness of it, the beast of it. And I think I did want people to be really uncomfortable. Obviously, I called it Nightbitch. Obviously, there's raw meat on the cover of the book. And the discomfort seemed essential, right? So by the end of the book, you could reframe the beast. The beast is reframed. And we're able to have a relationship with it by the end instead of exiling it. And I think that has something to say about the sort of darknesses in motherhood that we're not supposed to talk about, we're not supposed to bring into the light. And how can we actually talk about it? How can we be real about it? How can we be honest and come into relationship with that? I also have to say, I just really relate with this idea of porosity, right? Of we think there's so much separation, and even down on a sort of molecular level, um, we're not really separate from anything around us. We just have these words to sort of define different forms. Um, and I think that too is something that Nightbitch is trying to get at, right? She's like, am I doing art or am I doing my life? Like, am I a mother? Am I a wife? Am I a self? Am I an artist? And the idea of all the porosity of all of these identities and all of these selves sort of merging together. I also think it's interesting that, in early, often in sort of texts about the devil is multiple. Like the devil will have multiple faces, and we think of like psychotic minds as being broken, and there's multiple selves inside a mind. And so this idea of sort of like this unifying idea of porosity, I think there's something going on with that too in Night Bitch.
Definitely. And I keep running into that word porosity. I've read it now in it's like you learn a new word and then you see it everywhere. And I've been telling Jen about it, and I've been telling Kevin about it. And I'm just really, like, I've been Googling it too. And there are sitting on, yeah, it comes up in, I've found like two different artists who are talking about this idea of porosity. Okay, well, Jen has an artifact for us now.
All right. Next up is Shaman of Newark. And ours is a replica. So the original is at the Ohio History Connection, or the Ohio History Center. I don't know if it's currently on display, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. So it's either a man or a woman. We don't really know, but it's showing a transformation. So if you hold it in your hand and you look at it straight on, it is a man. But then as you tip it forward, it turns into a bear. And bears are another one of those animals that were really important to the Native American people. Did I say this was Hopewell culture? I don't think I did, but it's from the Hopewell culture, and it was found in one of the mounds. They were doing some digging in the late 1800s, and they came across a burial that had this artifact in it. And that's why I'm not sure if it's on display currently at the Ohio History Connection, because of NAGPRA, Native American Grave Protection Repatriation Act, which is a lot of stuff happening with that right now. But there's a man that found, or that came across a Delaware Indians in 1775, and he wrote, saw an Indian conjurer dressed in a coat of bearskin with a visor mask made of wood, frightful enough to scare the devil. So these shamans that were dressed in these wolves or bear, this was still going on in the 1700s. And Dr. Brad Lepper, which most of us in here probably heard of him. He's done a lot of research on this artifact. For a long time, it kind of just was on display. Nobody really knew what it was. And then he started looking at it and, started playing with it and realized that there was this transformation happening between man and then into the bear. So I'm just going to read what he wrote. There's actually a video on the website, Ohio History Connection website, and he's holding a replica and then showing you the transition. All right. He's dressed as a bear's head on his head, bear claws on his hands. He's wearing ear spools. One of the most fascinating things about this is that it seems to be a depiction of a shaman, apparently in the very act of transforming into an animal spirit. The hand on the head appears to be either in the act of lowering the mask on his face or perhaps raising it above his face. In fact, if you're talking about the shaman's transformation and simply tilt it, the shaman transforms before your very eyes. So there's this act of it transforming. The other thing is you can definitely notice the ear spools. So if you go down into our Native American gallery, you can see we have Hopewell items on display, ear spools, breastplate, a piece for the head. It's all made of copper. And so the ear spools would have been made of copper. So there's just a few other artifacts that would have been related to this transformation into another being. Did I get everything?
Okay, thank you, Jen. And I think what you were saying earlier, Rachel, about it's like the idea of motherhood being so narrowly defined as laundry on the line and everything's hunky-dory. And when we have these, when it's not going well, and we have these feelings like everybody else can do this, why can't I? And there's just this like silence about what it's really like, and feeling kind of lonely and isolated in that, and not even feeling sometimes like you can ask for help. And so one of the things as I was kind of coming down and as our time together became closer and closer, I kept asking myself, now, what are we doing? What is the point of this? And I keep coming back to that. And that's why I had you read that first section with that question that Wanda White is asking: how do women expand their identities to encompass all parts of their beings? And so I've just been kind of keeping that in the forefront of my brain, and how Nightbitch is helping us do that by expanding that definition of motherhood to be more inclusive. Okay, we're going to move on to section 3. We're going to focus on the girl who makes an appearance in the novel. And this is the girl / origin stories. So in this section, we're going to take a peek at Nightbitch's upbringing in a conservative Christian home in Appalachia to see if her upbringing has any impact on what's happening to her now. And Rachel's going to share a passage with us.
Oh man, this might make me cry. Okay. Her mother was good and responsible and holy and always somewhere far away in her own head or with a headache or napping or just please leave me alone. Forget your Grammy and her book. Be serious. Do something sensible. And always the girl had thought her mother was pushing her out the door, away and away, go fast. She thought this had been some sort of abandonment. But now she saw it for what it was, her mother's best love. How many generations of women had delayed their greatness only to have time extinguish it completely? How many women had run out of time while the men didn't know what to do with theirs? And what a mean trick to call such things holy or selfless. How evil to praise women for giving up each and every dream. It had been so long since she had remembered all this, so long since she'd even thought of it. For there had been a great forgetting when she left home, a purposeful forgetting, because to forget her childhood meant she had survived it.
And that whole section is just so powerful. When the book came out and I was reading reviews, and this is probably a review that I read by somebody on Goodreads who doesn't really know what they're talking about. But they questioned, like, do we really even need that part in the book? And I was like, yes, we need that part in the book, you idiot. We need that part in the book. So I'm glad you put that part in the book.
Thanks.
We're we're going to look at this, the origin story, and we're just assuming that the girls, that Nightbitch's origin story is the origin story that most of us in this room grew up with, and that's the story in Genesis of Adam and Eve. If you have read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, in her first chapter, she gives another origin story, the origin story of the Haudenosaunee people, and that is a story of Sky Woman. And then Kimmerer sort of compares Sky Woman and Eve. So just to catch us all up on, so we're on the same page, the story of Sky Woman is that Sky Woman lived in the sky with other sky people, and they weren't gods, but they were more than human. And there was a tree of life up there in the sky, and some, in different versions, the tree topples or it falls down, or it leaves a hole. And Sky Woman, in some versions, she falls, sometimes she's pushed, and sometimes she jumps, depending on the version. But she is pregnant and she falls through the sky, and on her way down, she grabs a bundle of seeds from the tree of life. And so when she falls through the sky, a flock of wild geese, sometimes swans, swoop down and catch her and hold her above the water, because there is only water, there's no earth. And then the turtle rises up and says, you can let her rest on my back. And then a succession of other animals, different in different versions, dive down. And finally, one of them comes back up with a paw full of earth. And then Sky Woman spreads the earth on the back of the turtle, plants her seeds, and trees, grasses, flowers, and medicine spread everywhere. And now that there was plenty to eat, many of the animals came to live with her on Turtle Island. So
Oh my gosh, that's such a better story.
yeah.
So much better. Thank you.
So then this is a quote from Braiding Sweetgrass. This is what Kimmerer says about this. She says, on one side of the world were people whose relationship with the living world was shaped by Sky Woman, who created a garden for the well-being of all. On the other side was another woman with a garden and a tree. But for tasting its fruit, she was banished from the garden, and the gates clanged shut behind her. In order to eat, she was instructed to subdue the wilderness into which she was cast. Same species, same earth, different stories. Like creation stories everywhere, cosmologies are a source of identity and orientation to the world. They tell us who we are. We are inevitably shaped by them, no matter how distant they may be from our consciousness. So, Rachel, how is the mother in Nightbitch shaped by the origin story she grew up with? Does Eve's banishment from the garden play out in the mother's life? And what if she had had Sky Woman as a role model?
Oh man, what if? Yeah, I mean, I think for her, probably everything starts in the garden with that story, especially because she was raised in a, such a kind of conservative religious frame. And I do think that story, instructs women how to be women and what is allowed and what isn't allowed. And it also hands women guilt, like guilt from the start, that they sort of owe the world something. I mean, I know for me, that story is something that I have put into my own stories over and over again, trying to figure out how to transform it. Um, and I think if she had grown up, I mean, the Sky Woman story, again, if you're coming at it from a literary analysis perspective, which is immediately where my brain goes, I mean, just reading, you know, where the woman is in relationship to the earth when it starts, I think she definitely jumped. She was not pushed. I think she was pregnant. She jumped. She took the seeds with her. She totally knew what she was doing. There's no man. She's both Eve and God in a way in that story. Um, and the fact that she's working in concert with the animals instead of lording over them, instead of creating him, that they're actually all of the same level, sort of. I mean, it's a much more egalitarian, I think, accurate origin story. It always, or I mean, maybe in more recent years, it's like so strange to me how Christianity made God the Father and had to do so many sort of gymnastics to like get to that. You know, it's like, oh, well, yeah, he's God the Father, but then there's like these three things, you know, there's like the Son, the Father, and the Holy Ghost. When just it's so easy to be like, God's the mother, you know, like it just seems like the obvious choice because of the power of creation that's, you know, located in our bodies. So, um, yeah, obviously, I'm pretty critical of the Christian origin story, and I think Nightbitch would be too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, well, it definitely makes an impact on us, these stories. And I was watching a woman on a TED Talk the other day, and she was talking about Eve, and I can't remember her name, but she was saying that even if you don't, like if you grew up in this culture and you had never even heard the story of Adam and Eve, or you didn't go to church, that story still affects you because it's just so much a part of the fabric of our culture.
Mhm.
And for one, I would want to look at, and I have been looking at this when I was Googling Sky Woman. If you go online and Google Sky Woman and Eve, you get all these hits because ever since this book came out, people are thinking about this and they're writing sermons on it. They're writing blogs on it. She's really opened up an avenue. And so there's a lot of good stuff out there. And some of the things I've read are like, well, what does that word dominion really mean in Hebrew, as opposed to the way we have interpreted it? And what does it mean, that word helpmeet? And so people are going back to the Hebrew language instead of the King James translation, and they're finding that it's not as black and white as we thought. And we don't have time to go into that now. But I really appreciate and love this book and Robin Wall Kimmerer for just putting it out there. It's kind of like, you know, I think we're living in a time where someone like you can write a book like Nightbitch, and it's like, okay, let's talk about motherhood. And Robin Wall Kimmerer can say, okay, let's talk about Eve, you know? So that's what we're doing. We're talking about stuff.
Yeah, and like we I think we're hungry for new stories and
Yeah.
better stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I, for one, feel like your novel is a new story in so many ways. That's why I say it's story is medicine. Okay, now Jen is going to show us some amazing artifacts.
Amazing. All right, so we have a turtle. I think it's a sea turtle. But it's stuffed with sweetgrass. Turtle Clan was one of the three clans of the Haudenosaunee Nation. and that's along with bear and the wolf clan. They are associated with the water element, which makes sense to the creation story, and then responsible for environmental issues. And the clan is said to be wise, strong, well-respected, and known for teaching patience. So yeah, it's this turtle. Is it a sea turtle? Yeah. I was really hoping you'd come tonight, and I mean, it looked like a sea turtle to me. It's stuffed with sweetgrass, which is really interesting. Native Americans have always used sweetgrass to weave their baskets, to stuff things. But this book, Braiding Sweetgrass, I'm not all the way through it yet. I think I'm about 3/4 of the way. It's just it just really makes you think about what we're doing here, I guess. But it's also an audiobook. So if you are not one to read, it's an audiobook. Do you want to read this passage?
No.
Skip it? Okay. And then this is why is that crossed out? This is from the Asian Gallery. Minogami. Did I say it right? There we go. Miogame. I forgot to ask you how to say it. It represents long life and wisdom. So even though, completely different parts of the world, turtle means very similar things in both cultures. I'm talking about this one too, right? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and read this while she continues to walk around with that. This is what we call a kachina doll. These are replicas as well. And this is a mountain spirit, or Gon, I believe is how I say it. And it's from the Apache tribe, or Inde. That's what they call themselves. Women are they hold prominent roles in their society. They accompany men on raids. They hold important positions. And this is really interesting, women in Native American cultures, because we look at people like Mary Harris. She was kidnapped from her Puritan family. She was taken away by the Mohawk tribe up to Canada. But then eventually she assimilated to Native American culture. And we often talk about it here at the museum. It's like, well, it just makes sense. Why wouldn't you want to be in a culture with a group of people that respect you? You're allowed to have important roles. You're allowed to have opinions and things like that. So it's something that we always talk about. It's, these women that were kidnapped and became part of the Native American tribe. Honestly, it was probably a no-brainer for them, because as Puritan women, they were just there to have babies and to cook dinner, right? Mm-hmm. They had no opinions. So this kachina doll, it represents the mountain spirit, and they do these dances. It's called the sunrise dance. It's a 4-day coming of age for women, and this isn't something that we have in our culture. We don't have this coming of age, this celebration of becoming a woman in our culture. It's more like, all right, go, there you go, you're in it. Good luck. But this is a 4-day celebration where they dance. They dance for like 10 hours straight, I think Holly said, to celebrate this. And I'm a dancer, and I'm not sure I could dance for 10 hours straight. That'd be pretty exhausting. But this is a transition from childhood to womanhood for the young girls. And so this represents the mountain spirit that they would dress like. Is that my last one? Yeah. I'm going to go back so you don't read ahead. There we go.
Well, and one thing about that rite of passage that they do when they're, the girls are, when they're doing this dance, it's on the last night, and it's a 10-hour, they dance all night long. And they become changing woman. And changing woman is the the principal deity for these people. And she's a female spirit who embodies the cyclical life forces of the earth. And she's called Changing Woman because she never dies. She starts out as young and she goes through the seasons of nature, the seasons of life until she's an old woman, and then she becomes a young woman again. So these girls, and I was thinking about this word porosity, these girls, as they are entering into womanhood, they are dressed in special clothes. They're anointed with pollen for fertility, and they are dancing like the goddess. Okay, so they are porous because they are not just pretending, they're not just playing, they become the goddess for the people. And I mean, that is really powerful. So our question for each of us to think about, the women or the men too, about, because I raised 3 boys and we talked about wanting to do some sort of a coming of age ceremony for our boys. And we never did really come up with anything, Kevin and me, but our boys kind of came up with those things themselves. But especially for girls, how would my life be different if I had experienced a rite of passage similar to the one that these girls did? What if I had gotten the message that the empowerment of women is a good thing and not a dangerous thing? And then also, what if the notion of fertility was expanded to not only include the ability to bear a child, but to produce any creative thing? And what if that fertility was celebrated? As a 14-year-old girl, your ability to create art or to write a book or whatever. So just something to think about. Okay, I'm thinking about our time.
Oh,
I think
who's
we're
the
out.
timekeeper here?
I think we're out of time, and we still have a lot to go, but that's okay. Because I feel like we have gotten Nightbitch off to a good start here. We haven't, the other 2 sections that we were going to talk about was just the mother herself, and then we were going to talk about the artist. And it would probably take as long as we've already taken, so there's no way we can do that. How do we feel about stopping and taking a few questions from the audience? If anyone has a question, this includes our Zoom audience. If you want to put something in the chat.
Do you guys have any questions here? Lucy has a question.
Should I come up and speak?
Sure.
Yes,
that would make it easier.
Come on down.
Welcome.
Hi, Rachel and everyone. So the question one of the questions I have been thinking about throughout this is, I know that in the critical reception of your book, there were some critics and some readers who had issues with the sort of brutal portrayal of animal death. And I thought it was interesting because I think that sort of impulse to be like, oh, we don't want to look at that, like, let's cover that up, strikes me as very similar to the impulse of like, we don't want to look at the sides of motherhood that aren't like this, like, oh, this is lovely and wonderful and fulfilling. And, it just struck me as a similar impulse. And I think maybe it's just my curiosity as a writer, but I want to know sort of, how did you react to that, if at all? And also, how did writing this book shape your relationship to animals?
Thank you. I love that analogy. I got really confused when people talked about the violence of the book because I mean, especially growing up where I did, up on the in Deer Spring, where hunting and I mean, just in Coshocton County, where like the 4-H kids would take their animals to the fair, and they knew that they were going to get killed, and kids would go hunting, and there were just dead animals always around, or like, the threat of dead animals, and so it was really interesting how people were like, this book is so violent. And I'm like, okay, well, like nature is violent. I don't know. Like, do you eat meat? Do you know where that comes from? Like it just struck me as I was very confused for a while and still kind of remain confused. Um, I think my relationship to animals hasn't really changed. I've always felt like I am of the animal world. And I think Nightbitch is really getting in touch with, yeah, she's a human, but like the dog that's been domesticated and brought into the home. I mean, we humans have been domesticated. We've domesticated ourselves, but what is the part of us that's still animal? I mean, it's still there, but we don't like to look at it. And so, yeah, I think, like you said, Lucy, a lot of this book is about, well, let's like dig in the dirt. Let's like go into the dark places and sniff around and have a look instead of turning away from it.
Thank you, Rachel.
Lucy says thanks.
Any other questions? I just asked the chat.
Question. Does the dark places inspire Rachel? She finds herself looking for that kind of a theme when she writes.
I heard it. Is that Patty?
That's Patty.
Hi, Patty. Um, I think I've always been pretty comfortable with darkness, and it's always been very intriguing. And I'm seeing the same thing in my son, who seems both sort of scared and intrigued by things that are, horrifying or so I don't think that I go searching it out, but I think I'm just curious. And I think that darkness, I didn't receive an education in darkness. Um, and so I'm interested in the lessons it has. And also, like, I don't want to be afraid of my darkness. I think that to me, that feels like a vulnerability if I'm like afraid of darkness. And I'm interested in knowing sort of all of the parts of myself. And I think that carries over into what I'm investigating in my writing.
And I think the Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Women Who Run with the Wolves, I think she would agree with that, just to embrace the darkness, because so what she does in this book, it's all these story, like fairy tales, and some of them are very dark. But to be able to embrace that darkness or that shadow, or and not just suppress it, I think that's what we're dealing with, the fallout from that, I think. Did anybody on the chat
Yeah.
have I can't see.
What first, Kaden, what first inspired you to pursue writing?
Well, I mean, I have said this before about the community in which I grew up and the household in which I grew up. And Holly was part of the community. And I mean, look at the sort of presentation she gives. Like, I want to take a course with her. And this is what would happen in our church every Sunday. It was really like a sort of like literary analysis / theology course. And I just grew up, and I'm very lucky that I grew up in like a reading family. And I think from an early age, it was really imparted to me how important stories it are, because our family was dedicated to sort of the story of Christ, right? And it shaped how we lived, how we led our days. And it just was, it was apparent how much power a story had. And so I think that's probably it's funny to be like what inspired me to pursue writing. It's like it's just a characteristic of who I am. Like it's not, it's something that just has always been there, sort of reading and writing.
Do you want to come up here? Or just want to say it really loud? Okay. Yael has a question.
Why did your mother become a dog and not cow or cat? We have a lot of domesticated animals, and dogs have a very particular set of characteristics that, like the stereotype set of characteristics. Why dog?
Could you hear that?
I did. I heard all of it. Thanks, Yael. Well, as I said about other elements of the book, that was not thought through or planned. It was just instinctual. And I think my reverse engineered answer to that, after having written the book and thought about that question, is this idea of, yeah, dogs are something we've domesticated and brought into our, into our family spheres. There's also always been a part of me, though, like dogs can also turn. And there's something about dogs I don't trust altogether. They can like snap, they can, they act in weird ways you're not expecting. And I've always also kind of been a little afraid of dogs. So I guess that's my best answer. Maybe it could have been a cow, but I think it had to be something that we like
Don't want to
that
be a
is seemingly harmless, but in an instant can sort of transform into something you didn't think it was.
Well, and I think there's also the werewolf thing where it's like people can turn into werewolves, they can turn into dogs, and which would you rather want to be, and which is more dangerous? And I guess I thought of it as, well, she could have been a werewolf, but like you were saying, the dogs can also be a loving pet. And so, in fact, I felt like if I had one complaint about the movie, you have a scene in the novel where the father comes home and the mother is nowhere in sight, and the little boy is in the house with this strange dog. And so the father comes in, I think the dog leaves, and of course it's Nightbitch, and so she knows that the boy is safe now, and she's going to go out and do her thing at night. And I feel like they didn't do that in the movie, and that I felt like that they missed an opportunity, because the dog in the movie is this magnificent, beautiful creature, but we never see her interact with the boy, I don't think. And that may have just been a choice that they made, and it's fine, but having read the book so closely, I was like, that would have been awesome to see this beautiful dog playing with the boy. It just felt like a missed opportunity.
Holly, I completely agree. And I think that what you brought, that whole idea of how dangerous also means protection, that's such an interesting dichotomy. And the fact that a dog, can be dangerous and can also bring you into its protection, bring you into its danger. I mean, there's this duality to it that is really satisfying. But if you did that, then you would be saying that she did actually turn into a dog and it wouldn't be ambiguous
Yeah.
any longer.
Well,
So maybe that's why they.
didn't she turn into a dog? I
I don't
vote
know. What do you think?
for dog. I think she did. But that reminds me, I forgot to ask you your personal question after looking at the shaman who turns into a bear. At the end of the movie, the little boy is playing with his mom and dad in the backyard. It's a beautiful scene. And the little boy says to his mom and dad, he says, "You be a bear, and you be a bear, and I'll be a bear." And so my question for us to think about is, when was the last time you were a bear? Or a dog, or a tiger, or a unicorn, or a mountain, or a bird? And if you have small children, it may have not been that long ago since you were one of those, or they were one of those. But again, that's sort of getting into that idea of porosity. And I was going to say this earlier. We've kind of focused more on the Native American artifacts, and we had some Asian artifacts for later. But one thing I was going to say about this idea of porosity and the relationship between animals and humans, in the practice of Qigong, which I teach here at the museum, not right now, but I will again, hopefully. One of the oldest Qigong practices is called the 5 Animal Frolics. And so when you're doing these exercises, there's a tiger, there's a bear, a deer, a crane, and a monkey. And you have to be all of them. You can't, no favorites. But you're moving like a monkey, but you're also, your attitude is monkeyish, or you're moving like a tiger. And so it's in that, again, the porosity of it, not for these ancient Chinese people, as a way of being healthy and a way of moving, and even for their martial arts. You know, they say that Tai Chi, which is an offshoot of Qigong, the way it started is somebody was watching a crane and a snake fight, and how agile and, you know, everything they were. So then they started doing their own movements to emulate that. So anyway, there's lots of different ways of being porous, but that would be the question. When was the last time you were a bear?
It's been a minute.
Okay, it's been a minute. Were there any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
I have a question about the Nightbitch as an artist. You explained her art when she was in grad school, I think, and then the performance art at the end. Where did you get these ideas? Because they're pretty great ideas.
I mean, so I was in 2017, I was an Iowa Arts Fellow here, and I had a cohort of other artists. One of them is a brilliant multimedia artist named Lee Running, and at the time she was doing a project where she would take deer that had been hit and were dead along the highway and take them kind of, what is the stuff you put, anyway, she would like put them in this old bathtub to strip all the, like, you know, all the muscle and the hide off of the bones, and then she used jeweler's tools to carve out these intricate, delicate designs in the bones, and then she would gild the insides of the bones and then put the skeletons back together. It was called Cure. And it had a lot to do. I only realized this in retrospect. And she was like, "Duh, Rachel." I was like, "Was that about mothering in some way?" And she's like, "Yes." I was like taking these bodies, bathing them in a bathtub with my apron on, like putting them back together, making them beautiful. And I was just really struck by that. Again, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I thought, oh, well, if Nightbitch were an artist, this is the sort of art she would make. Um, and I think the idea of performance art came in um, because she had this sense like, how are all these moms around me performing motherhood like that? Like, I don't have the capacity to perform motherhood in the proper way. Um, and I think in the back of my mind, the whole book, I was thinking maybe all of this is just preparation for a performance art piece. Like maybe that was in the back of her mind, that this is her just kind of, not only exploring motherhood itself, but exploring then like a performance of motherhood and how to stage that in a way that felt authentic. And that just felt like a really interesting, rich terrain to write into. Yeah, so I just kind of grabbed what I could in terms of the art stuff. And she's a weirdo too, she would probably be doing some like weird experimental multimedia performance, whatnot. I think I was also thinking about Maria Abramovich at the time, who seems kind of witchy and magical to me.
Nice. I went to art school with a girl that did stuff with bones, and since I lived in the country, I volunteered to pick up bones for her, and she nickel plated them, I think is what we were doing. So it was really weird, but as I was reading this, I was like, what? This is
Yeah, and I mean, we're
I mean,
sort
it
of
was
like
different, but there was a little bit of a connection there.
oh, that's cool. I feel like there's definitely like a certain trope of art woman who's like, let's go find dead things in the woods. And like Lee and I are like completely on the same wavelength. She's like, do you want to hear something gross? And I'm like, yes. Like we want to look at like gross and we want to look at dark things. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Anything else? Any other
Um,
questions?
I have one more question for you, and this is a question we were going to deal with, but it about the mother. So in the book, before she begins to embrace her dogness, the mother is always trying to get it together. She's always trying to, and she makes all of these rules for herself. No caffeine, eat more vegetables, make a schedule. I've got to get it together. And her husband even says, happiness is a choice. And in the movie, she slaps him. So I was just wondering for you, Rachel, because in the end, there's a great scene at the end of the book where she's with her friend Jen at the museum, and they both kind of break out of that whole idea of getting it together. Like we are all under this illusion, I guess. I mean, have y'all gotten it together? Anybody out there? We get it together and then we lose it again. So I was just curious about your process of writing the book and whether you made a schedule and you stuck to it, or whether the writing of the book was as messy and wild as mothering.
Whoa. As you were talking, I was just thinking, wow, aren't all the like paintings and images we've seen of like Mary and Jesus just like the ultimate images of like togetherness? Like she's a single mom, she's well rested, all of her clothes are clean, she looks real pretty, she's really calm. Anyway, I wrote this book, unlike anything I've written before. It actually was really regimented, but only because I wouldn't get anything done unless I did it that way. And it was done in kind of fits of writing. So I would write 1,000 words for a day for 2 weeks, and then I like wouldn't write for 3 months, and then I would write 1,000 words for, like I had to be really regimented about it, but it also felt sort of chaotic, right? Because I'm used to sort of going into a project and then being in that project, but I had to kind of come in and out of it. Um, which is that's not, I don't do things in a regimented way really ever. I'm much more into chaos. So, um, yeah, but that was just, I was really determined, and I was also the mom of a young child, and didn't have a lot of time to linger. So, yeah, I think it was a nice mix of structure and chaos, probably.
Well, I was just curious, 'cause I've read about other moms who squeeze it in whenever they can or
That
get,
sounds horrible to me. That sounds like a nightmare. They're like, I write after the kids go to sleep. I'm like, I don't know who you are. I could never do that. It doesn't work.
well, you mentioned Mary and Jen sort of fast forward. We'll share these. We have this Ecuadorian Madonna cradling a child. And I was actually looking for another, it was a print of Mary that we used to have that we no longer have. But when I was looking for that print, I opened up the bundle of the stack of prints, and this print on the side here, 16th century Italian print of Saint Helena. And she is the mother, Saint Helen is a mother of, oh gosh. Well, close. Oh shucks. The guy that sort of legitimized Christianity and they quit. No. Constantine. This is Constantine's mother. And doesn't she look tired? And I don't know if it's because she's Constantine's mother or just anybody's mother, but she led him the wrong way, yeah. So I just had to include this because this is an actual picture of a mother this is how mothers look, sometimes. And then this other little mother here, from Ecuador, we will end with her just as and Mary was not as meek and mild as we think of her as being. If you read the Magnificat, it's a song of revolution. It's a song of turning things upside down, sending the rich empty away and feeding the hungry. And we have been led to see her as a meek and mild and obedient person. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, again, has written another one of her books is called Untie the Strong Woman, and it's about Mary. And she imagines Mary saying to her, be friendly, but never tame. So Mary has a bit of the wild woman in her as well. But so how I want to end tonight is with one more little tiny short passage from Nightbitch. This is at the end of this document, Rachel, under wrapping it up, and it's page 230 in Nightbitch. Do you see
Okay,
that?
let me see if I can find it. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Can you read that for us?
Sure. And this comes near the end of the book. This must be what it means to be an animal, to look at another and say, I am so much that other thing that we are part of one another. Porosity. Here is my skin, here yours. Beneath the moon, we pile inside the warm cave, becoming one creature to save our warmth. We breathe together and dream together. This is how it has always been and how it will continue to be. We keep each other alive through an unbroken lineage of togetherness.
And I love that little paragraph. To me, it's sort of the overall gift of the novel. Because at this point, the mother, she's thinking about her son and how it was right after he was born as an infant, and sometimes she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. But she was also thinking about her parents at this point, and the prospect of her parents as they age, and if she would at some point have to take care of them, and what it would be like to wash her father's back or to brush her mother's hair. And so then she has this beautiful passage: this must be what it means to be an animal. And that last sentence: we keep each other alive through an unbroken lineage of togetherness. So just being in the museum with you guys and with these artifacts and this novel and thinking about the artifacts, I feel like I'm going to get, for me, finding these artifacts, I sort of read the collection through the novel, and I read the novel through the collection, and we kept finding all these things. Like we found She Who Watches, and that was like a bonus, you know. And there were some other things that we didn't get to talk about, but just feeling like this collection is so alive and so vital and so in conversation still with us. And so the people who made these things, and even our Johnson brothers, you know, I think about these two bachelor brothers who traveled the world and collected all of this stuff so that we could have a program tonight and relate all of this. He was like, oh, well, they might need this turtle stuffed with sweetgrass. This will be rich. No, that's porosity. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you out there in Zoom land. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Cheyenne.
Thank you.
Thank you, Holly and Jen and the museum and everyone there. An amazing amount of thought and care went into this presentation, and it is such an honor, and I'm really moved by what you've done. So thank you so much for that. And we can think of you as, I mean, what are curators if not people who hold things, you know, people who put things in a bag. So thank you for doing that for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, good night.
Thank you. Oh, there's Ingrid.